Well, we've got a mysterious replay here for you on somewhat of a mysterious day. I think this is the sixth take I've taken in filming this video. I keep running into weird problems, so something is afloat, probably something going on in my computer. But maybe it's part of the mystery that we're about to dive into. So you might be wondering what in the world about a baseball replay could be mysterious, right? Because the majority of us, we pick a season that we want to play for whatever reason, and we play the games with our favorite game engine, and we compile statistics and present the results to each other and say, look, we're done, and then we talk about it, and then we forget about it. This one's a little bit different, and it's kind of weird. This is the 1949 American League replay done by a man named Conrad Horn. Now, if you've never heard of Conrad Horn, join the club. If you have heard of him, you know this name from the APBA Journal. Conrad Horn was, as far as I can tell, the original replay guy in the APBA Journal before Daryl Hollis came around in around 77 and started the famous APBA Alone column. The guy who was in charge of replays for the APBA Journal was Conrad Horn. And what Conrad did basically is he would take replays that would come in from other people, and he would look through them, make sure that they were readable, and they would show up in the APBA Journal. Back in those days, we're talking like 73, 74, 75. There weren't that many replays coming through, and the ones that did get through were not always of the highest quality. Conrad Horn wasn't exactly like a regular columnist. There were other people in the APBA Journal who had a much more regular non-paying job with the volunteer publication. Conrad Horn is very interesting, though, because I never knew he did this replay. It was one day on Twitter, a little bit over a year ago, and I forget, and I apologize, I forget who it was who uploaded this stuff, but somebody uploaded all of these photos, not really even scans, of these original, I guess, newsletters that he created by hand to celebrate his 1949 replay. As far as I'm aware, this 1949 American League replay was never presented in the APBA Journal. I'm not aware of anything that ever came up. I might be wrong. I haven't read... Well, I have looked through every issue, but I haven't necessarily read all of the like anniversary content and stuff like that. The other interesting thing is that Conrad Horn himself kind of doesn't come up after about 1975. So let's just jump into this and see what we've got here. So you can see he called it 49. He grew up, or he was, I say he grew up. I don't know where he grew up. He was living at the time in Potomac, Maryland, which is not that far away from where I am, probably about an hour and a half away. There's no way I'd be able to live there because you have to have a lot of money. It's kind of an expensive place. You can see here, this is dated May 15th, 1974, right over here on the bottom. I know my mouse keeps disappearing. And that's when the first version of this newsletter came out. In fact, this date at the top is incorrect because when I put the PDF files together, I kind of created the wrong date. So my apologies there. You can see, just looking at the layout, that Conrad spent a lot of time making sure that things were laid out, making sure that the articles were of the right size, making sure that the columns looked right. This looks better than the APBA Journal looked in 1974, and I'm not exaggerating. This is a very, very impressive professional job that he's done here. He includes box scores, which is something that the APBA Journal had a hard time putting together. So you can see here's the Athletics against the Yankees, where the Athletics won 31-6 on the strength of 12 walks. And he had all sorts of commentary and everything. Here's the Red Sox beating the Senators 21-9. So I'm glad that we have that kept for posterity. There's some other interesting things that he did as well. For example, there's a little bit of history required to understand this part. Conrad created his own homemade extra players. So back in the good old days of APBA, you got 20 players per team, right? That was it. In the 60s, sort of in caving to pressure, J. Richard Seitz decided to come up with extra baseball players, is what he called them, XBs. If I remember right, it started off with 4 extras per team. I think we were still at 4 per team in the mid-70s, eventually grew to 6 per team. then 8 per team. And then now, of course, there's the push to try to have a card for every player, regardless of how long he played. Now, the problem with just 20 players per team is that you can't have realistic pitching if you only have 20 players. You don't have a pitching staff, right? So what are you going to do when a guy has to come out of the game? That's exactly what Horn's talking about here in this article. He had to create a whole bunch of extra cards so that he could have realistic rosters and realistic roster movement. In fact, thanks again to the person who uploaded this stuff on Twitter, we have copies of some of the cards that he made. These are some of the cards that Conrad Horn made, 50 years ago to play his replay. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that incredible? These are not the original cards, but these are sort of carbon copies of them. Pretty interesting stuff to look into. Now, we're going to jump far ahead, and we'll go take a look here at the summary that he came up with at the end of the season. So, no real spoilers here. You could tell from the thumbnail. Ted Williams won the Triple Crown. The Red Sox won the pennant by 5 games. Cleveland finished in second. The Yankees were third, and a somewhat distant third. They were, 8 games behind Boston. The interesting thing here is looking first at batting average. So we didn't follow on base percentage that much in this replay. Remember, Conrad Horn is doing these stats by hand, right? He doesn't have ball score and ball stat. He doesn't have an electronic calculator, right? My 14-year-old son has one of those TI graphing calculators. Conrad Horn doesn't have that, right? I don't know if he has an abacus or not, right? I'm not sure how he does this, but he's kept these statistics by hand. And so, yeah, you can't expect him necessarily to keep track of slugging percentage, on-base percentage, and all of those stats. He's probably just going to do the most basic ones, which is what he did. The batting average that the league came up with was 265 as opposed to 263 in real life, which is really close and actually pretty impressive. I think for any replay to come that close is pretty impressive. However, runs scored was way off. They had over 7,000 runs in the replay as opposed to under 6,000 in real life. Runs scored were so far off. You got the Red Sox scoring over 1,000 runs. That's not necessarily out of the question because they did that in 1950. But you also have the Athletics almost scoring 1,000 runs, the Yankees almost scoring 1,000. I don't think too many people will be upset or surprised at that. But the Indians scoring almost 900 runs, which is crazy, right? The White Sox scoring 871 runs. There was something going on. There's some sort of problem. Now, you should think it's a little bit strange, right? If you have batting average that seems to be right on, but run scores are high, where are these runs coming from? And that's the big question. Well, we can go skip through the end of this document, and we will actually not receive an answer to the question that we're all asking. When we go down here, we can see that we have individual statistics for batters and pitchers in every team, including walks given up and strikeouts recorded. For batters, no walk statistics, which is interesting. We do have RBIs because, remember, it's the mid-70s. And comparison with real life, which is, sort of interesting. Although, as far as I'm concerned, when we're talking about individual players, it's interesting within the storyline, right? But it might not necessarily be so interesting when we're trying to compare statistics. We want to look more at the larger level stats. Good heavens, the White Sox had 7 Grand Slam home runs, which is interesting. Now, the real interesting thing here comes from the bases on balls. And when you just look at this, you don't have to add them together. Just by looking at this, you can tell that there's something off. There is indeed something off. I went ahead and started adding up those bases on balls. In the replay, the American League had over 6,000 walks. Now, this 5,627 walks, I believe, was the record, all-time record. They had more walks per 9 innings than any other part in the history of any league in the United States that I'm aware of in 1949. 6,000 walks, though, is incredible. That's an increase of, 13%? Right? Every team had an increase in the number of walks given up. The team with the smallest increase amount was the Yankees, and the Red Sox also had a small amount. I have a theory as to why that is. We won't get too deep into that right now. But some teams like the Browns give up 25% more walks than in real life. The White Sox almost 21% more walks. That's crazy. These are crazy numbers. Absolutely nuts. And the thing is that Conrad Horn knew that. And so when we go forward here to one of the later issues. This isn't in the summary issue. This is in issue number 22, the April 2nd, 1975 issue. We'll see a pretty interesting thing. We go all the way down here to the end, and we see that he, Conrad Horn, that is, wrote a letter to Fritz Light saying there's something wrong. So he was telling him that the APBA company might have used formulas that were applicable to the 1960s in making cards for 1949, which is probably true. My thinking was that if you base the 1949 cards on the on-base percentages from today's low-scoring game, you would multiply the impact of adding more hit numbers and walk numbers to the boards, which is probably a complicated way of saying this. I think I know what actually happened. We'll get to that in a second. Light responded immediately to my letter, as immediate as you could in the days of snail mail, and said that it was a little surprising because we haven't received any reports of gross inaccuracies in any of the 1949 replays we've been sent so far. I think that's kind of APBA corporate speak for we didn't playtest this and we're surprised that it wasn't right. There were replays going on at the time. There was no way that anyone was going to complete a full replay as fast as Conrad Horn was. I mean, like, I'll show you here kind of what's going on, right? So let me, let's see. I need to detach this tab. There we go. This is the folder that I have with all the Conrad Horn stuff. If you want to read these PDFs, I'm putting them up on my members area. You can go, if you're a paying subscriber on the Substack, you can go check it out, right? He had issues for every single week of the regular season. Some of these, he was playing like a week's worth of games, real life week's worth of baseball games in a real life week, not counting the time he used just to create the newsletter. I mean, this is incredible, right? We have one on August 22nd, 1974, and then one on August 30th, 1974, right? And then, oh, well, he took like almost 2 weeks to get the next one out. I mean, like, look, I'm doing this sort of thing. I'm not doing it the way that Conrad Horn is. I'm trying to do this on Substack and put out videos and stuff like that. And even I will feel overwhelmed from time to time writing like a 5-paragraph whatever thing. I'm not writing like a 4 to 6 page summary of everything, including full statistics that I'm doing by hand, right? I mean, like, I don't think that there are a lot of people out there who are more dedicated to the replay business than Conrad Horn was in the mid-70s, right? So for Fritz Light to sort of imply here that, oh, well, other people have been doing this, you're not the only one, and their results are fine, there's something wrong with you, I think that's a little bit beyond the pale, right? I think that that's a problem. I don't think that we should be saying that, right? I mean, Conrad Horn is like an absolute super fan when it comes to this. All right, I'm aware of one completed 1949 replay, a 2-league effort by Steve Davis of Arlington. I'm not sure if it's Virginia, Texas, or what. And Davis said that he had to change pitching grades at midseason because certain aspects of the game were so far off. Whoops. Getting back to Light's letter, he obligingly reminded me that 1949 was, of course, a record year for walks in the American League, and consequentially, there were a large number of W pitchers. The average number of 14s per card is also much higher than in any other season APBA has produced. So if you're not familiar with APBA, the dice roll 14 is a walk unless the pitcher has a letter Z, that prevents it from happening. This is going back to mid-70s APBA. Similarly, other numbers, play result numbers, can turn into walks if the pitcher has a W, meaning that he was wild. My understanding is that APBA had like a cutoff, so pitchers who gave up more than X number of walks per 9 innings would get a W. And hitters who had more than X number of walks per 9 innings would get an extra 14 on their card. Unfortunately, what happens is when you have like the record for most walks given up in a season, if you're using that type of methodology and you're not thinking about how one thing can affect the other, you might end up double counting. And that's exactly what's happened in this case, right? We will go into more detail later on the 1949 season, but this is actually very, very consequential in the history of APBA baseball. This season, which was APBA's first season of the past, ended up being a total disaster, and I think helped pave the way for a lot of the problems that the APBA game company has had since. At any rate, Conrad Horn leaves this, and he says, if I were going to do this again, I would recard everybody. He also says that he would completely change the boards around. Sounds like a lot of work, including adding this WW rating, and then he would recard certain players like Eddie Joost, Ferris Fane, Vern Stevens that seem to produce too many walks. So interesting stuff there from Conrad Horn. Now you're wondering what happened to this. Where is the mystery here? The mystery is that Conrad Horn then disappears from the APBA scene. We know that he started a 1958 American League replay. I assume that was after the 49 replay, but I don't know because he didn't put down a year on his newsletters. He just put down the date. I believe that he started another replay and gave it up partway through, but I don't know what happened or why. And this is where it becomes interesting. I mean, what do you think happened? Do you think he was so upset by the 1949 results that he just gave up on everything, right? Do you think that, he figured that APBA wasn't for him, or was he really angry with Fritz Light for his response? Do you think that Conrad Horn was, just fell out of love with baseball? I mean, it happens to some of us, right? And decide, I'm not going to sit around rolling the dice anymore. I want to do something else with my life, right? I don't know what could be more interesting than that, but maybe some people feel that way, right? Or do you think that there was some sort of sinister thing, right? Did J. Richard Seitz and his goons go out to get him to try to shut him up about the problems with 1949 and to try to silence all of this? I don't know. I can tell you that there definitely is a reason why Fritz Light wrote back quickly to Conrad Horn, because Horn was writing for the APBA Journal, which by the mid-70s was much more influential than anything the APBA Game Company was saying about its own game, right? If you remember when we were talking about National Pastime and what happened when that was first revealed, there was a lot of concern on the part of the APBA Journal that they would lose their relationship with the APBA Game Company. But the real fear, honestly, probably was on APBA's side, because it needed the APBA Journal to create this idea that the APBA baseball game was something that was important and exciting and that people needed to continue to play it and continue talking about it, right? Because there's no better advertisement in the world for your company than some sort of independent reviewer that is completely dedicated to your game and that is going to tell people for you that it's like the best thing in the world. That is what happened, and that's kind of the role that the APBA Journal played. If Conrad Horn had published this in the APBA Journal in like 1975 and had said, hey guys, there's a huge problem with this season and with these cards, he could have done a lot of damage to the APBA Game Company, because you're not going to sell cards to people if they look at it and say that things are falling apart. So there's a lot of interesting things that are actually happening here with this replay. This isn't just some dude's, random results that nobody had ever heard of. Now, if you were around back then and you knew all about this, like, please let me know down below. I'm not aware of like anybody who knows about this or who knew that this replay was a thing. And it's one heck of a pretty interesting discovery to make, that there was somebody who had this type of fascinating and really in-depth replay that happened without most people knowing about it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think down below. Let me know what you think the answer is to the mystery. Again, if you are a paying subscriber onto the blog in the members area, you can go through and download all these PDF files of that feature all the original newsletters. You can read through them yourself. There's a lot here to go through. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening. This was a fascinating replay, and it's fun to talk about. Let's talk about it some more. Talk to you later. Bye.